Magandang hapon po sa ating lahat. I am Julian, your host for today, and I welcome you to the fourth day of the Institute for Nationalist Studies first anniversary, part 2. Today's event is entitled Terra Nullius, a workshop on mapping. This event is brought to you by the Institute for Nationalist Studies along with Rise for Education Kisay, Rise for Education Alliance, Concerned Students for Justice and Peace Metro Manila, and National Union of Students in the Philippines. Bago tayo magsimula, narito po ang ilang mga reminders para sa ating event. Firstly, please keep your camera and microphone closed at all times unless you are requested to do so by the speakers, the hosts, or anyone from the production team. Second, please do not record in video or audio any part of the event to respect the speakers and other participants and their privacy. Please also do not take screenshots of any segment of the event. And lastly, there will be an open forum after the speaker's discussion, wherein you may reserve your questions until then. Or you may send your questions and comments in the chat box. Maaari nyo rin pong gamitin ang official hashtag na hashtag 1NS to share your thoughts on social media. Maps are preeminently a language of power, as mentioned by Dr. Joseph Pallis while quoting J.B. Harley. After our previous forum, The Geography of Imperialism, we now focus on the process of mapmaking and its importance in reconstructing anti-colonial and anti-imperial narratives. Today, we discuss how our generation's digital map makers can help democratize whilst struggling to decolonize and politicize the production of geographic knowledge. Our speaker for today is a geographer and a map maker currently based in Aotearoa, New Zealand. They studied Bachelor of Science in Geography and a master's degree in Urban and Regional Planning at the University of the Philippines, Diliman. To further broaden their expertise, they obtained a Master of Science in Geospatial Analysis from University College of London. They have also worked as a mapper and urban planner for the United Nations during the onslaught of Super Typhoon Haiyan. They were also Geographical Information Systems Specialist at LSE Cities, a research center at the London School of Economics and Political Science, as they share their creative cartography projects online. Currently, they are taking up a PhD in Geographic Information Systems in New Zealand. To share their knowledge and ideas to the public, they currently write at Medium. In their post, Making Maps Useful for Addressing Disaster and Climate Change, they discussed the need for usable maps that could be crucial in times of crisis. They note the issues with map reading, such as accessibility, misunderstanding, representation, and ambiguity. With their project, they envision to solve this by ensuring that Philippine communities are better equipped with geographic information that they can both access and fully understand. Through the use of critical geographic thought and computational geo tools, they translate data into meaningful visualization to accomplish their vision of critical, computational, and creative cartography. Let us give a virtual round of applause for David Garcia.
Yay! Share. Right. Okay, kita na natin yung screen ko. Kita nyo ba?
Yes po, kita po.
Salamat. Okay, salamat po. Thank you so much for this opportunity. And I want to tell everyone that even if I'm gonna present very unsettling ideas, I hope we can also enjoy sometime in between. And hello sa BTS Army, thank you sa request. Now I'm gonna tell you a whole story of how we can at least try or attempt to maybe decolonize or at least unsettle map making in everything that we do. And I'm gonna do that by telling about my research and snippets about that, entitled Where Do You Come From? Why do I say where do you come from? Dito sa Christchurch, and whenever I travel to conferences, meetings, workshops, airports, taxi, even yesterday, I always get asked this question: Where do you come from? Where are you really from? And then I say, I live in Christchurch. No, where are you really from? So imagine you getting asked that every day. It has an impact on your on your research. And eventually, I wrote a whole PhD. I've been writing a whole PhD about that. Also, this is a journey of me becoming a map maker, recalling and recounting and analyzing my previous work for the past 10 years with me and my relations and the values I carried, and some of the critical issues I've seen and possible ways forward. Another possible title is How to be a Fishbone. Nilagay ko yan dahil napansin ko na nilulunok ako ng sistema. So sabi ko, kung lulunokin ako ng sistema, di magpapakatinik na lang ako para mahirapan sila. And I'm gonna tell you about that experience. This is the general study that I'm doing, how to make a map maker. That's the broader title. And my method is called ethnography, specifically autoethnography and a critical autoethnography. I chose this because sometime when I was developing my proposal, I noticed the inherent problems of both making maps and writing about people, which is what geography is known about. And I said, well, maybe I shouldn't study indigenous peoples for the ethnography, which forms the bulk of this project. I will study people like me. So instead of using cartography and ethnography to study indigenous peoples, I flipped the gaze and studied people like myself, because we are people too. And by doing that, I hope I can open possibilities and ways forward. And I'm very happy to present this to you because it is people like you that I imagined to be the audience of this project. Nung sinusulat ko ito at in-imagine ko, sino ba yung kausap ko sa research ko? Ako lang ba? Nanay ko? Bayan ko? Sino? Naisip ko, dapat yung kabataang Pilipino na gustong pumasok sa profesyong ganito. Ano kaya yung mga bagay na dapat nating malaman habang pinapasok natin itong industriyang ito at ay gumagalaw at mabubuhay sa espasyong ito. So, in many ways, kausap ko din yung batang version ko nung nasa Cruz Naligas pa ako. Alright. Next. The first part is maps and stories. And there will be 3 parts in my presentation / workshop and also social media thing. And at the end of each story, I'll show you a map, and then we can also have an exchange, or at least do something fun. Maps and stories. Why did I say this? Maps and stories, people and places, visuals and narrative are always interconnected. Lagi yan. A map always has a story, or a story always has a map, because both of them derive from a cosmology and a value system from which the map maker and the storyteller draws meaning and tricks and power too. Right. I'm also very inspired by the saying from the Philippines, ang di marunong lumingon sa pinanggalingan ay hindi makakarating sa paroroonan. Apparently, this is a popular phrase across the seas of islands of the Pacific, even here in Christchurch, even in Hawaii. Our Austronesian relatives, dahil pareho tayo ng ninuno na galing sa Taiwan, naniniwala sila na we are walking backwards to the future. And that is a key philosophy, a cyclical space-time philosophy that I've been trying to develop too. Kaya ko nilagay yung bagyo dyan, yung cyclone emoji. Right. Dito ako nanggaling sa Pampanga, is where I come from. At least my father's side, my mother comes from Bulacan. And our lives were really shaped by crises, katulad ng pagputok ng Bulkang Pinatubo, katulad ng pagtatayo ng base militar ng Amerika, the largest overseas military base of the US, during the US invasion of Vietnam. I do not call him the Vietnam War because I want to shift the focus. It was a US invasion of Vietnam. And my town, my home province, was used as that forward operating base. So the bombs will go here, and the toxic waste and all those bad stuff. And then they will forward it to, let's say, cities in Danang across the West Philippine Sea or South China Sea. And then they will do their thing and make empire across the ocean. And my town was a staging point. And for me, it just became natural for me to just reveal these realities because me and my peoples lived with these realities. Kasama na din yung ating mga kababayan na Aita na mas nakatira, mas malapit sa paanan ng bundok. Pare-pareho tayong napinagdaanan, although with different lived realities too. And I acknowledge this positionality where I'm speaking of. So that kahit na, ang gusto ko sabihin, kahit na even if I'm Kapampangan and I'm a native, I also have my politics and my interests, and that really influenced my writing and my arguments. So I want to be careful about that too. Okay, may istorya. There's a story in our town that when Pinatubo erupted and I was 1 year old, people attributed that to Americans putting instruments under the ground. And for the longest time, I didn't believe that as a geographer. I said, oh, come on, uh, plate tectonics and all that. But years later, I've been thinking about how these stories could have actually messages that we could pick up about the presence of imperialism in our lives as Filipinos and how every generation is doing their best to get freedom and be free and united like the ocean. In my case, my journey that was given to me by my ancestors, relations to descendants, is map making. And this is how I get following social media. I share my maps usually for free, and then people ask questions. And then I use that to tell stories about colonialism. So medyo minsan parang trap din siya. Maglalagay ako magandang mapa, tapos kikwento ko sa kanila yung kasaysayan ng pagmamapa. Because for me as a map maker, I have an ethical responsibility to let people know about the foundation and history of the discipline so we can correct the mistakes of the past and hopefully move forward together with equity and justice. And then recently, I've just shifted forward in terms of my relationships too. I am trying to make the Pacific or the ocean in general as the center of my world. Um, and I've been doing this and sharing that. So thank you to everyone, especially to folks who have been in this journey. Please subscribe. Joke lang. Please keep in touch. And this is just ongoing. Uh, but a lot of my critical experience also comes from my relations that I built during my previous work in Hayan and also Marawi. I also had to go to therapy last year just to heal from all of this, and I'm ready to tell the story now. Right, I will start with Hayan. So noong 2013, may dumating na bagyo galing sa Micronesia, sa mga kapitbahay at kamag-anak natin sa Bilao and surroundings of islands papunta sa Pilipinas. Dumating siya sa Tacloban at alam natin nangyari, hindi lang, it's not just uh, the natural disaster that was a disaster, even the reconstruction was a disaster. So people called it disaster capitalism. And due to the unfortunate events there, we had to respond as map makers. So this is the UP Department of Geography where I used to teach. I am part of the generations that and the cohorts that were taught by Professor Oni Martinez and the faculty there. And we were crowdsourcing through a project called OpenStreetMap, the map that I showed earlier where my hometown is. And some of you might have seen this presentation because I've been presenting this slide since forever. So I'm gonna fast forward to an important part in the end. So long story short, we wanted to make open geospatial data accessible because the damage was very intense, and that was where the topsoil is, and it's taller than I am. This is in Calicoan Island, near the place where Ferdinand Magellan landed in 1521. So let's remember that this is an intersection of crisis, colonialism, and climate change. Now, during the time, we were caught in a conundrum where the government wanted to move people out of the no-build zone, but the reality there is maybe perhaps for the whole Philippines, there's really no safe place in the Philippines. And there are only places of varying risk, and our ancestors have tried to live with these risks and adjusted. And I think this decision by the Aquino government to just move everyone out of the coastal areas is very ill thought, given the condition of the resettlements too, where there are no jobs, no water, no opportunities. So we just went around with our team and tried to live with the folks there, and we emphasized the oceanic nature of the place. The place has one of the largest coral reefs in the Philippines, the Giwan Barrier Reefs. And it's an amazing place, but the unfortunate fact is a place of mining too. So there are places there where DNR gave permits for nickel and copper mining, and that complicates the situation some more. So we also tried to recognize and articulate and uncover that. Then we checked the archives of the Philippine government, the National Mapping Agency, and we noticed a very interesting thing. Even the village, let's say in Victory Island, that place I showed you that was heavily hit by Super Typhoon Haiyan, it's missing from the maps, from the government maps. So I told myself, this is kind of a triple injustice. First, you're hit by the strongest cyclone in the world, which was strengthened by climate change, which we did not really cause. The most of the emissions didn't come from us. Number two, um, the people are missing from government maps. And then number three, the government is trying to move the people in. It's like triple erasure. And I said, what's the best? I was thinking, what's the best thing I could do within my powers, especially as a UN employee before. So in the usual training that was given to us by the Department of Geography, we did participate in mapping and map the hazards, talk with the people. And all those issues about borders were also raised, which we could not solve because it's not our responsibility to do so. I don't have the authority to resolve borders there, but my actions have an influence on that. You notice that. So we made the maps not just for them but with them and put them in tarpaulin format. And you will see here our colleague Miko, who's now flying internationally with Mapbex, who's also part of the Ministry of Mapping. Uh, Folks were trying to come together to come up with, say, evacuation plans. And then 1 year later, there was another cyclone with similar strength, and I think the ocean, no one died. In Giwan in Samar, where we did the work, I noticed there's really a difference between making maps for the people and making maps with the people. And in that process, we try to discuss and really understand the place, and also refuse to map certain areas. So there are places there that locals told us to not put on the map. So we had to respect that. We have to respect their sovereignty and their rights and their privacy. And for me, that's an important act to just cultivate, because I noticed in America, representation is a big game and it's such a popular narrative. But it is also in the right of the locals to refuse that, to refuse to be seen for privacy reasons, for safety too. All right, next. Uh, Long story short, because of that experience, I was able to get scholarships, and you can really see there the differences between my class position as a Kapampangan and Tagalog with parents who have connections in the government and the church, and also the people I left, the disaster survivors. And this is the part of my journey when I went outside from the Philippines to London for the first time, that I really noticed such differences in my positionality. That actually the things that I do, even though I have stories from the field, I need to be careful about what I say and how I present myself, because I also carry my own biases, which comes from, the typical mono-nationalist idea of what the nation is. Because I believe the Philippines is a plurinational place with networked and overlapping sovereignties. And when I was there in the UK, I also tried to understand how that system works, the international crisis mapping community. And I noticed, for example, in this place in London, in University College London, where digital mapping was pioneered and I studied, I noticed the limitations of crisis mapping, that because it's crowdsourcing, there's really a lot of disconnection between what the volunteers do and the lived experiences of the people. And it's our responsibility as map makers, Filipino map makers, if we want to make the most out of this system, to at least mitigate the harms by that disconnection and also imbalance of power. Right. And then I went back and tried to do the same thing with a similar team in Marawi after the battle. So umuwi ako nung September 2017. The battle ended October 2017. And then uh, I had a lot of I underwent a lot of personal changes too, because during the experience when we were making the maps, we noticed that even the act of map making itself, even if it's for humanitarian reconstruction, rehabilitation, also has detrimental effects to the participants. So, for example, there were times during our sessions where This was done with many other colleagues, and I'm not the only map maker here and participant, where we had to pause the exercise because the map making was also triggering. So imagine you are a disaster survivor, a war survivor, and then you see maps of your own place and you think about how it used to be and it evokes so much traumatic memories. And that's when I thought there are moments when the right thing to do is to not make a map. And many times, even for me in my upbringing, I hope that's also your values, that the relationships are more important than the maps. And this is the value that we carry in the Ministry of Mapping, that the map makers and the people we work with are more important than the maps and the mapping, and the community that we serve are more important than all of that. Uh, if if we have to stop mapping to preserve the relationship, we will do that. And it's also good for ourselves. For example, when we formed last year as Minister of Mapping, last year at the start of the pandemic, we had to be clear about our relationships with each other, that we're gonna take care of each other, and we called it hashtag Cartography. So there are many times that we had to take a break. We also supported each other. Or last year, November, when there were 5 cyclones that hit Luzon, at the same time, if you remember that stressful period, ang daming bagyo nung Nobyembre. After that, we took a long break, and until the community pantry mapping. And after that, we're also taking a break again. And I'm highlighting that because a lot of us, when we are young, we're so passionate about helping the world and also taking care of others. But we also need to balance that with spaces of rest and refusal, because these are also acts of resistance. Sabi nga ng nanay ko, anak, kung patay ka na, hindi mo na magagawa yung gusto mong gawin. So even I have differences in politics with my evangelical and government parents. My mother has kind of a point that sometimes the act of outliving the people who are causing the problems is also an important tactic. Right. Around the same time, and this is a work with Rappler, with Patricia Evangelista and Carlo Gabuco and the Rappler team, we were also mapping, so habang nagtatrabaho tayo sa Marawi, we were also mapping the human rights violations of the Duterte government using the same tools. And this was a time when in 2017, everyone was very stressed. And I know it was hard times before, and it's harder now too. And I want to recognize that. And this was the time when my practices also changed again, that we needed to be more careful with how we engage with the community. So my quick story about this map is, number one, it made me think about what about the maps that we did in Super Typhoon Haiyan? Baka ginagamit din sila ng police dahil open. So that made me very critical about the information we reveal and the safety of the communities we serve. And number two, I noticed that the values of the people interpreting the map also matter. So when we put this map on Facebook, our intentions was to show that the war on drugs is the war on the poor. And this is connected, as you know, to US imperialism and tactics that they applied to war on drugs in North America and Latin America. And our intention was to convince people that this was wrong, what the government was doing was wrong. But when we put the map out there and I was scrolling the Facebook comments, I noticed there are still fellow Filipinos who are just they are using the map to justify their own biases. So nung nilagay namin yan, ang sabi ng mga tao, yeah, dyan talaga sila yung mga nagsashabu. So you can see there that you can have the same map, but a very perverted value system. Somehow people will find a way to fit that geographical data and scientific work into that uh, bias or whatever they try to the story they want to tell. That's why I told at the start that stories and maps are always they're twins. It's very hard to separate them because both of them come from value systems, which always mix. And this made me really rethink my work. So I took a break from this, and that's why I needed to go somewhere safe for now. Right. There's another story that I've been wondering about when we were doing participatory mapping sa Samar. Once upon a time, we were doing open street mapping, participatory mapping. And believe me or not, in the same room where we were doing the the meetings and the humanitarian classroom meetings. Once upon a time, an aircraft carrier appeared doon sa Samar. And US Navy officials came into the room and they talked with us. They met with us, barangay, LGU officials, and then they said, uh, um, "Sir, thank you for making democracy work in your region and making the Pacific free and open. And it means that thank you for upholding our imperial power in the region." That was the message I got. And looking back, I also tried to reflect on my experiences when we were going around doing field work when I was still teaching and studying geography and urban planning, environmental planning. Napansin ko na nung nag-field work kami sa iba't ibang lugar sa Pilipinas, sa Panay, sa Mindanao, sa Bicol, may kampo ng militar. Ako naman, si tanga, I was so stupid back then. It didn't sink into my mind that the revolution is still here. Why are there military camps across the country? It means that people are struggling over land and space, and something is suppressing them. There's a power that's suppressing the freedom of our peoples. So I had to unpack all of these experiences in my research and reveal a geography of neocolonialism, which I followed later in conferences later. But this is something that I want to tell you, since my intention is to speak to a younger version, perhaps of myself, that we live in a recolonizing world. But the good news is we're still here to tell the story and do something about it. So I don't want you to get hopeless. Kung isipin nyo, 500 taon na, pero nandito pa tayo mga kapatid. Magtatagumpay tayo. So ito yung aking favorite na quote for us to pick up and maybe reflect on for the first part of my workshop slash talk slash having fun while telling depressing stuff and also having fun. That map making is about power, and we need to be responsible about the use of power. We need to recognize where do we get that power and whose power we respect. Every map maker has a sovereign and a power and relationship they respect. I put that in the chat. And for me, I'm in a constant process of rethinking, recalibrating, rearranging. Para kanino ba ako nagmamapa? Ito yung favorite naming linya sa Ministry of Mapping, and I hope you can also support us in this journey as we try to navigate this recolonizing world and hopefully decolonize hanggang maipasa natin sa susunod na henerasyon ang laban. All right, so before I proceed with that, I'm gonna show you a fun map that I would like you to be involved with only if you want. You can also refuse. The other day, I had free time over lunch, and I said, oh, maybe siguro gawa tayo ng counter map. Dahil na-inspire ako nila Joseph Palis, nila Mang Oni, Sian Dairit, and everyone. What if we flip the game? Something like, let's try to declare Spain Españoles, and then put the provinces there. And then I asked everyone, okay, do you want to claim Spain? There's nothing there. It's empty land. And then people just started commenting here and claiming pieces of land on Instagram, on Facebook, and Twitter. And this is an ongoing process. People are submitting to me like, okay, gusto ko yung I want Barcelona. But the fun part is I already claimed it for my mother, yung Nueva Bulacan or Bagong Bulacan. I also want Andalusia at the start, at the bottom, because Alhambra is a very beautiful palace. And the fun part is the Westerners see this see this project and they're also laughing, like it gives them a mirror of the kind of ideology that was used on Nueva Cubao, yes. And yung mga gusto ng Nueva Bataan Transit or Nueva Cogyo, pakilagay na din sa ating social media. If you want to claim a place, just put it there. This is ongoing. And then later I'm gonna put it all together and explain the process. And this is the fun part. Some of my colleagues in the uni are saying, is this research, David? What are you doing? And the good thing is I belong to both the College of Arts and Sciences. I can do both. Yeah, new BGs. Yeah, just Nueva Etivac. Ano yung Etivac? Sige, ilalagay ko na lang din. Okay, Nueva Etivac. Okay, Nueva Cavite. Okay, na-claim na ang I think sa may Santander or Basque region. Yan. Anyway, so you can also do this. Sometimes we need to do what I call trickster work. So katulad ng sinabi kanina, like what was said before, you use the dominant tools and then flip it around. It may not necessarily result in the immediate future that we want, but I think one of the things that we should do is continue to unsettle things and try to make more spaces where people can have the flexibility to do something better. Oh yeah, that's a thread. Thank you very much. It's also on Instagram. If you're on Instagram, and it's also on Facebook. This is part of the workshop, so just comment away. Right. Okay, so part one is done, and now I'm gonna delve deep a bit more. And please feel free to put some of the questions. I'm gonna notice the comments that you do there. Oops, gusto kong palitawin yung ating ano, right? Okay, babalik na lang ako sa chat later. Next is about, so that was my career in the Philippines when I was still living mostly full-time in the Philippines. Now I'm gonna skip to when I went abroad. Uh, I start I started a PhD project in New Zealand about crowdsourcing, and I proposed a method called Follow the Map Makers. Again, it's a geospatial ethnography that studies not the indigenous peoples but the people who make and share the maps and have control over the maps. Amazons and humanitarians. What do I mean? Right. In OpenStreetMap, this is the simplified process. You have a computer, you have volunteers, you have satellite imagery, and then you trace, and then hopefully it's for good. But this is a simplified version of the story. This is the PR version, and the the output is this. As the story goes, that it goes on the internet, and hopefully it's an objective and universal democratized map of the world. That is a desire that most OpenStreetMap volunteers try to fulfill through the open mapping movements. So let's contextualize OpenStreetMap in terms of the open knowledge movements, which includes Wikipedia, Open Geospatial, and many other open communities. And you can trace the idea of the open knowledge societies to, let's say, open societies, groups supported by George Soros and influenced by the philosophers like Karl Popper, sa mga, for people who like philosophy of science, who apparently lived here in Christchurch and wrote the book about open society. So for me, this is so buzzy. Right? The universe sent me to the place where the philosophy was written to critique the philosophy in Christchurch. And then one time we were mapping New Britain while I was in both in Christchurch and London. So I really felt I entered Empire starting from my trip to London and then to here, and then I saw the same place name. So that really made me question, because when I'm walking here outside, I see a place called Victoria Square or New World Mall or Columbus Coffee. I said, oh, very colonial. Parang sa atin, San Fernando, Pampanga. So malaman mo na, okay, dumating ang mga Kastila. So it's like, what? I need to know more about this story. And I started becoming more involved with the same crowdsourcing community that helped us during Hayan Hot, because I really believed in the mission. And to a certain extent, I still do to a limited extent. But I really wanted to make sure that my participation, the participation of my people, will be safe, or at least hopefully ethical. And this is what I did. I traveled not to indigenous communities, but to conferences. So the conferences and the mapathons and the hackathons were my fieldwork place. Zoom calls, meetups, etc. Because that is also a space. It is cyberspace. Cyberspace is a space. And I did talks, met people, and tried to discuss. I even talked about what if OpenStreetMap is colonial, and of course people got violent reactions. But I had to do it. And deep in my heart, I just felt I was following an assignment from the ancestors. So para sa akin, parang quasi-religious mission siya. Pero may nararamdaman talaga ako sa yung mararamdaman mo sa iyong chan, the one that you feel in your gut that, okay, I am onto something. I do not know yet what it means and what it looks like, but maybe this is an important thing. Right. So this is the part when my map started going viral, and the unexpected mini fame. The interesting thing is when we were doing the mapathons and hackathons, um, whether in London or in other places, in Wellington, here in New Zealand, I heard this phrase when we were mapping. The task is to map an island in the Pacific, for example, in the mapping hackathon. And then I heard the map maker saying, "Oh, there's nothing there. There's nothing there." I went to Germany. There's nothing there. I went to Wellington. There's nothing there. I even heard it from myself. So I said, na-internalize ko yung ideolohiya. And for me, when I was writing my notes about this experience, because most of these happened in 2019, I really, now the gut feeling was becoming more clear that it was not just a gut feeling. May data na ako. Meron akong evidence that it is a phenomenon, and I would like to connect that, let's say, the appearance of the aircraft carriers Samar during our open mapping session, that there's really an imperial system going on that we need to reveal, that we need to talk about, and that we need to undo. Because I believe at the bottom of our hearts, even the map makers that I work with, there's a desire there to do something right. So I'm trying to tell them, hey, the story we have in our mind is all of these imperialist and colonial conquests happened a long while back. Like, that's over. But based on what I saw and what I witnessed and analyzed, it's still here. It's a momentum that's been going on. And this is where our philosophy comes from. Ang di marunong lumingon sa pinanggalingan ay hindi makakarating sa paroroonan. Sabi ko, okay talaga tong quote na to. Very useful, very philosophical, and very revealing. Our ancestors really knew how to investigate the nature of space and time and really understand dynamics, especially geopolitical dynamics. Why is it important to recognize, articulate, reveal, critique, and dismantle the system? In colonialism, I'm really thankful for Linda and Joseph for setting the base. So I don't need to explain othering, si Edward's aid, si Orientalism, and it's intertwining with the patriarchy and the war and global capitalism. My addition to that is these ideologies distort our views of who we are, and also the colonizers' views of who they are, because it splits the world into, like what Linda said, binaries. We are complex people. We come from multiple genealogies, multiple stories, multiple values, multiple futures, multiple histories. And our lives are born out of networks, and the confluence of so many factors. But with colonialism and imperialism, it simplifies it to past, present, future, and you can only be a binary, other or the center. And it's both unfortunate, damaging, and it's also boring because it's either you're taken as, or you're very good or you're very bad. And for me, even as an academic o bilang tao, I don't see the world that way. Uh, in fact, before, when I was doing full-time humanitarian, I really thought I was the good person. Ginagawa ko to para sa bayan, para sa sangkatauhan, only to realize later, oh, wait a minute, look at these networks I belong to. I even came to the point where I stopped mapping. Ayoko muna magmapa kasi ako yung kalaban. Kumbaga, base sa mga relationships ko, yung edukasyon ko, etc. Maybe, ano na ako, sa salitang, oops, nilamon na ako ng sistema. So I thought, how do we unlearn this? So I really took the time to spot certain key ideas that we should avoid, or at least put aside and unlearn, so we can move forward with equity and justice. So here they are. First is the idea of the map monster. This is a very popular, even in fantasy books. When there are old maps, there are monsters on the maps, and there's a hero who goes out and vanquishes all the maps who will disappear someday. I've put several questions on these slides that you could pick up and ask, who's your other, who defines it, sino sentro ng mundo natin. Number two, Another idea, the great chain of being. So I live in Christchurch, near the mosque where the terrorist attack by the white supremacists from Australia happened. So may Australian no, na white supremacists pinatay yung mga kapitbahay ko noong 2019 dito sa Christchurch. Ginawa niya yun dahil meron siyang, the white supremacists had this view of being better than everyone, that New Zealand is the white man's land. And I thought, where did that idea come from? Sabi nga ni Macleing Dulag, how can you own something that outlives you? Um, the land would outlive us, and how can you do that? And people violate that principle in the universe by believing this story that we are in a great chain of being. Doon si God, tapos si mga anghel, at si Father, at ang mga tao. Pero pag mas puti ka, nasa taas ka. Pag mas maitim ka, mas kulot ka, doon sa ilalim. Tapos mga hayop, mga halaman, ang lupa, at ang mga demonyo. And I said, how does this look like in my life and in my relationships? Whose power and sovereignty do I respect? And this really exists. I will put an example later. Okay, next idea is the March of Progress. I studied in Bloomsbury, London. It comes from the place, especially in the 1800s, where academics, usually white men, geographers, anthropologists, yung mga nangongolekta ng ulo ng tao, British Museum, eugenicists, yuck. Also, nandun si Darwin, yung laboratory niya, geographers who are also designers of prisons. These ideas came from a particular place. In geographic information science, we have what is called spatial autocorrelation, or Tobler's first law of geography. Nearer, similar things are closer to each other, or nearer things are closer and more similar to each other. And London, Bloomsbury in particular, where I studied digital mapping for the master, is a source of that. And I noticed that there, from those places in Europe, for example, those stories survive to the centuries about the idea of progress and who gets to be called advanced and who gets to be called primitive and backward. And when you spread that on a global level, you have these young people desiring to be like the oppressor. So it reproduces the chain of being that I told you about. So ask ourselves, kanino natin, who do we compare with to when you feel bad? Sinong tinitignan mo na para gumaan yung pakiramdam ko? Dahil madalas, galing din yan sa mga problematic desires and ideas na ito, I presume. Next, this came from the US Settler Colonial Project, Columbia, a painting of Columbia, the New West. If you look at this painting, andyan you see Miss Enlightenment or whoever Liberty, she's chasing away the indigenous peoples. Tapos paparating ang tren, paparating ang settlers, yung kabayo, yung mga tulay, and they're enlightening the world. And this is also a popular imperial and colonial value or story, whatever, imagery, iconography. And this is the core. This is the core of the problems in the world today. The assumption that when you settle lands in the name of whatever big project, you are making the world a better place. So let's try to define that. Dito sa New Zealand, we have this interesting version of this phenomenon where, and I told this in the chats, where ideas about kindness are told to you, oh, let's be nice with each other, let's be kind. So that's what happened here after the mosque attack by the white supremacists. And people responded to that. Let's be kind. This is not us. And we, the people of color here, with our indigenous relations, who also said this, that no, this is really part of the fundamental nature of the colonial project. Let's not pretend that this does not exist. But there's a tendency for folks to brush that aside, especially if you're a settler, or if you get privileges from that. Oh, let's be nice, let's be kind to each other, which means let's not talk about the deeper issues. And then the violence is outsourced to the state, to the police, or to the developers, which is happening right now. And for me, it's an important story that we need to catch right away, so we can do something about it. Okay, This is very related to the othering and Orientalism I told about, and the map monsters that uh, in our desires to make the world a better place, whether through mapping, storytelling, other projects, um, the key feature is to paint the other as a savage, whether brutal or noble. Uh, these are two sides. So the British were very effective in brutalizing savages, while the French, they were very good in idealizing. But the end of the story is we're gonna colonize you anyway. And for me, um, I think we Filipinos are falling into this trap too. Because I've noticed, let's say, yung mga YouTube videos and Facebook posts about yung mga katutubo sa Pilipinas na ina-idealize or sinasabi na backward sila, na kailangan silang iligtas or i-develop, or ito ding noble savage na before the humans lived in harmony in nature, parang story ng Avatar, na very simplified. No, it's not like that. Our ancestors, they did great things. That is true. They navigated the largest ocean on Earth, but they also did terrible things that we should learn from. They're humans, complex humans, makes mistakes. And I think that's a lesson for us Filipinos whenever we look at, let's say, heroes or models we aspire to become, that we really need to see for at least hope to see them for what they did and who they are. Parang istorya lang nila Bonifacio, nila Aguinaldo, nila Rizal, uh, who were lionized and canonized as heroes. Meron din silang mga ginawa na marahil hindi tama sa lente natin ngayon, and we need to really be critical about how we interpret the past, yung walking backwards to the future, so we can move forward with equity and justice. Right. And finally, this is about people like me. Who makes your maps? Who do you get your maps from? Um, who are they working for? Where do they come from? And how do these images impact our abilities to understand complex realities? That's why I always doubt myself on an everyday level. I always reevaluate why I say what I do and why I do what I do, because mapping is about power and we need to be more responsible in the use of that power. Right. Okay. Here's the fun story before I proceed to the third part. Once upon a time, which is called last year, in the middle of the pandemic, our humanitarian colleagues and Amazon produced a documentary about mapping the Philippines. They have a project of mapping 1 billion people around the world. And somehow we already resolved this, but I need to let you know that this happened. And so it wouldn't happen again. They picked, they sent the chief technology officer of Amazon and humanitarians, white men, to map, of all places, Pampanga, which has already been mapped by Filipino map makers. Minamapa na nila bago pa sila dumating. But the documentary, which they already took down because we protested, was something like this. So 10 minutes, the typical parang YouTube video, tropical islands, beautiful beaches, parang dito sa likod ko. Ginagamit ko din pala yung imagery. Dangerous volcanoes, cyclones, people we need to save, people in poverty. So yung poverty porn, yung pinasok din as I'm not surprised. And then sinentro nila yung Western narratives about saving the world and making the world a better place from very Western and patriarchal perspective. And then sa dulo ng video, there was a voiceover and also an image, something like, in the medieval ages, there were monsters on the map and people in the dark. We need to enlighten and save. So sabi na magkakasama, that's it. That's the one. Lalabanan natin to. So nilabanan namin, nagsulat kami ng ng protesta, ng call to correct the narratives, and then they took it down. Because we really felt that they were recolonizing us and they were appropriating the project that we, especially OpenStreetMap Philippines and the older, even the recent volunteers, have been very carefully trying to work on to regain the control and sovereignty over our geospatial and geographical knowledge. It reminds me of the story of Magellan 500 years ago, and how people forget that during the circumnavigation of the world, Magellan was actually aided by Enrique the Austronesian. They had a slave that they got from Southeast Asia, and then they went around the world. And then they found out when they came to the Philippines that Enrique could speak the people's language. So technically, sino yung unang umikot sa mundo? Si Enrique. Yung unang umikot nung circumnavigation of the world is an Austronesian, one of our ancestors, which is amazing. But these stories are not usually told because the stories of the dominant cultures are very easy to reproduce. It's so familiar, and it is our job to let the young people know. No, there's more to that story that you didn't know, and we need to be honest about that. Right. Okay. So in summary, I'm trying to summarize this section now because I need to proceed to the next one part. Um, in a very simplified linear story before, this is the map making, and people expected map makers, sorry, map makers like them to do it, at least in that story. And then it continues to be a tool of colonialism. So, for example, during the annexation of the Philippines by the U.S. Empire, they sent cartographers and ethnographers to do this. And then it changed a bit, let's say during the Cold War, when digital mapping was pioneered because it became intertwined with developmental projects. So I highlighted this person. This is Robert McNamara. And Robert McNamara was the Secretary of War or Defense of the U.S. Empire. He promoted the use of digital mapping and the use of the work by cartographers and anthropologists and military advisors and put them to develop the digital mapping technologies. And this was also the time when GPS was being used for their Cold War with the Soviet Union and their allies. Fun fact, Robert McNamara was also CEO of Ford. And then after that, when he was CEO, he became Secretary of War. And then after that, he became the president of the World Bank. So make something about that. And then recently, now with the humanitarian industry and profession, it is not just about outsiders coming in. Now, the mode is the creation of a map maker. That's why the title of my research is How to Make a Map Maker. How do world systems create map makers like me? Like I get the scholarships, tumaan ako sa humanitarian work, and then I get to become labor for these global projects. But in that system, there's a big tendency to reharm us and recolonize us, and we need to push against that. Right. This realization came to me last year when I was making my notes. I said, what does this mean? And then I was reading geopolitics, which is one of my favorite topics. And I noticed, yeah, there's really an intentional project by the US and its allies for free and open Indo-Pacific. It's very public. The policy documents are there. The Philippines is part of that geopolitical economic project, which is basically an attempt to dominate global capitalism against China because both powers are struggling to dominate global capitalism. And I really noticed similarities between free and open Indo-Pacific and free and open mapping. So I had to question myself, why am I in this community? What's my assignment? Why am I still participating if I know that there is a tendency for recolonizing to happen? And what do we do to at least delay or resist or at least reveal this system? My hunch was further validated during COVID about that othering and the desire to subjugate our places. This is a crisis map by a popular crisis mapping group during COVID. And it's very funny, yung typical na when you're not rich, they put they put the colors on your place. The red, more red circles, like you're another dangerous place, or the map monsters, so to speak. So I told my colleagues, even on Twitter, I said, this is so biased because, for example, last January, there was a white supremacist uprising in Washington, D.C. Where is that? That's a crisis. Or let's say the impacts of colonialism and the nuclear testing in the Pacific, it still lingers. The Western powers tested nukes in Marshall Islands, in the center of Australia, in Tahiti, in French Polynesia. That is not here. Isn't colonialism and imperialism a disaster in itself? So you can see there, this is where my gut feeling led to. Okay, I've pulled the curtain away. And then this was also the time when I was applying for jobs. Kasi because I need a job. I need to eat and pay my rent. And I noticed that folks started closing doors. I didn't get the jobs I applied for so many jobs, and I didn't get them because I was starting to be very vocal. Alam niyo yung bata na nagsasabi na, ay, hubad si Tito. Yung you stating the obvious. Tapos people saying, no, gusto sabihin niya. Gusto sabihin niya. Shh, tahimik ka lang, bata. So that also happened to me somehow. And this is a journey that I'm trying to navigate very well because I think, if we're humanitarians, we need to be honest about our values too because our work has impact. Right. So I'm gonna pause now and I'm gonna, yeah, tama, in the comment section, parang yung terror index lang. So you can see it's so predictable. I'm not even surprised anymore. Right. Cool. I'm gonna show you another fun map, similar to that one. Then this time, this was from just the other day. Uh, Mabenta din ito. Sabi ko, okay, let's declare England an empty space. And then, all right, ang sabi sa akin, your segment will be 5:30. Oh, all right, sorry, I need to wrap up very soon. Okay, I will do it. I'm almost there. And then we did the same thing. So nilagay ko yung barangay ko dyan, New Sindalan. And then people were starting to claim London. And then there are folks, sabi ng isa Irish colleague, hey, let's make it New Dublin. And then sabi ko, gusto ko din yan. Tapos may isa pa. Tapos sabi namin, let's make a treaty. We need to make a treaty which will later violate. Okay, so if you want to do this, please participate, and thank you very much for that participation, potential participation. Right, I'm gonna finish now, which with a more inspiring part, hopefully, so we can discuss to later. Um, where do we come from? Where do I come from? Where do you come from, David? And at one point in my journey, it became so depressing. When you see the empire and how it operates, parang mabigat talaga. Pero siguro sa paggabay na din ng mga ninuno natin, may nakita akong pag-asa, kumbaga. Binibiro ako ng mga kaibigan ko, may story na kamukha ko daw si Rizal. Totoo naman, parang kamukha ko nga daw. In fact, nung primary school student ako, I was in the place playing Rizal. And when I was studying in the UK, I lived near the house of Rizal, and I've also accidentally visited Heidelberg during my first international keynote where Rizal finished Noli. So I said, okay, maybe ano lang historical accident, but I couldn't really believe na, alam niyo yun, this is so silly. So I had to look deeper. What were the things that Rizal and his contemporaries might possibly miss? One day, my friend sent me this photo of a person in Madagascar, sa kabila, sa Indian Ocean. And I started this journey of, okay, there's something there. I need to follow. So pinahaba ko din yung buhok ko, by the way, para consistent. There's a culture called the Austronesian culture, and many of you might have been taught this already in the more updated curriculum in the universities. Many of you possibly not. But the Austronesians, broadly called, came from the area known as Taiwan today, and they are the greatest navigators in the world. They've been traveling for thousands of years. Parte sila ng mga ninuno natin, part of the complex genealogies that we have. And I realized this when I came to Aotearoa, New Zealand. Nandito. So nandito yung Pilipinas, ito yung New Zealand. I was in a conference once, and then I heard someone say, Matwa Angus. Hello, Matwa Angus. Sabi ko, can you repeat that? Matwa. Can you spell that? M-A-T-U-A. And believe me or not, we say the same words in Kapampangan. It means elder. Mas matandang. Usually lalaki dito. Pero sa amin, sa Pampanga, in our place, it means an older, someone you respect. And then I tried to learn more. People say in Tereo Maori, mata, lima. The word for the land is fenwa. Sa atin, banwa. The word for sky is rangi. Sa atin ay langit. And many other words. So I said, I'm onto something here. And I said, I need to recreate and remember where I come from, because I think, imagine I went all the way around the world had to apply for so many scholarships, went to some of the top geography spaces for education. Uh, I didn't know. So how come a geographer and map maker goes to all of this educational system, and then we are denied this knowledge? I think it might be intentional or by design, but now I remember and I carry this story. It's so amazing. Other people, scientists even saying, and researchers, that Austronesians reached South America. So when imagine when the Europeans were going in the Mediterranean, our ancestors were connecting the seas of islands, whether you call that science or not, they were exploring and enjoying geographical knowledge. So here are my final points. Number one, the ocean has always been a space of contestation historically, and we are living through it. Like in this map about Pacific supply lines by the US Empire, empire is about logistics, and we need to reveal this map. This is a very nice map I saw in a friend's house about mapa ni Elmer Borlongan. Baka kilala niyo siya, napakagaling. And it also reveals that our ocean spaces are always contested, and we need to do something about it. And also, the Pacific is not empty. In fact, empires die due to their greed for the Pacific. I always imagine the bottom of the sea, somewhere in eastern Philippines where the typhoons are. There at the bottom are sunk Spanish galleons, US Navy, Japanese Navy. They're all dead, all bones. And for me, that's very inspiring as a anti-colonial Filipino na may katapusan din ang imperyo. Kasunod, we should also know that the slicing the ocean is absurd. It's just philosophically, materially. That kind of imperial imagination is just wouldn't work in the long run. Another one is we belong not to small island nations. We belong to large ocean states. Um, we have been taught that we are small island nations because the ideas about sovereignty are so land-based. But our ancestors saw the ocean as a space too, as a living space, and we need to carry that too. Next, this is a gift. Knowledge is a gift from our Marshallese relatives, sa gitna ng Pacifico, the ocean's texture. So you can see here the shells are connected by possibly representations or articulations of swells and wave patterns. And our relatives know that the ocean is not an empty space, it's a network. And I would like to propose, and let's work on this. The Philippines is part of the Pacific too. We have our differences and cultural and particular differences, but I think we belong to a bigger family of people. So let's reflect on that in our work. We need to recreate our notions of sovereignty in terms of oceanic terms and oceanic philosophies, and also link our struggles and our experiences and just relate better with our relatives across the oceans. Believe me or not, sa Hawaii, sa Marshall Islands, dito sa Aotearoa, sa Tahiti, uh, sa Solomon Islands, there are really commonalities about how we see the world, especially the word banwa. Sa atin sa Pilipinas, sinasabi yung banwa tungkol sa tao, tungkol sa taon, sa kapampangan, or time, or langit, or the land. Dito din sinasabi iyon. So imagine that it survived many generations. And because of that, we can resist this kind of boxing of space and time, which is so absurd. This is the traditional notions of sovereignty according to Westphalian ideas. So let's connect those struggles. There are still colonized countries in the Pacific, directly colonized. This is not usually taught in schools. The French are still in French Polynesia, and also Kanaki. Hawaii is still occupied, was stolen by the United States, the US Empire, from the Kingdom of Hawaii, and many more. Especially even in Australia and in New Zealand, the settler colonies here, and these are all interrelated struggles, and also West Papua. And I'd like to introduce you to certain figures that you would like to read more about. Please read more about them. Edikoy Kimay, Mabo, Haunani Ketras, Pius, Papamao Piailug. Let's learn from their lives because they are Austronesians and Austronesian influence too. Right. This is the real closing. Once upon a time, I'm going to show this. I've been volunteering in a Waka Kaupapa, in a Waka volunteer group. And I noticed that there are similar patterns here and here. Ano ito? This is the Manunggul jar, one of the oldest artifacts in the Philippines from, I think, Palawan. And it just shows that the life and death of an Ausonesian revolves around the boat. Bangka. Saan nilalagay, saan nakalagay ang bangka? Sa banga. Ano ang nakalagay sa banga? Yung bangkay. Ah, ano ang salita para sa village? Barangay, balangay. Ano ang salita para sa bahura? Bangkota. So makikita natin that the ocean is really the center of our universe. And for me, that is super inspiring. Right? Amazing, no? 3,000 years apart, 8,000 kilometers away. The story lives. So that's why my maps changed. This is a map I made last March, commissioned by a Fijian curator, Vunilangibo. Thank you, Emma Tavola. And it was acquired by the Auckland Museum recently. Made a big map of the Pacific. Sinentro ko ang Pasipiko, binaligtad ko, at makikita mo talaga na ang Pasipiko ang sentro ng mundo, the steepest trenches of the oceans, and this para din siyang bagyo, like a swirl. And for me, it's very inspiring because for the longest time, maps have been centered on Europe, and Pacific is split into half. And you could see how those biases played into generations of colonial imagination. And it's my role as hopefully an anti-colonial mapmaker to unsettle that. So when I centered the Pacific, I say this to my relations, my world really changed. Right. And my final conclusion, final is, I hope we can enjoy this journey. Minsan kapag nalulungkot ako, iniisip ko na lang din na sana balang araw masaya yung aking mga descendant. Na kapag nandun na sila sa kalangitan, babalikan nila, yung aming mga ninuno, ginawa nila yung makakaya nila para lumaya tayo. So yun lang, salamat po.
Maraming salamat po para sa isang insightful and comprehensive discussion with regards to map making. From your stories about your lived experiences during Typhoon Haiyan and Marawi, and from becoming a geographer reflecting on the cyclical nature of space and time, I'm sure that the participants present today greatly appreciated your stories. Additionally, the process of map making is evidently rigorous and time consuming, though for a good cause, as seen in your presentation. I especially liked your point about how rest is also resistance, especially in these times wherein anger and agitation may oftentimes overwhelm us. Indeed, living in a recolonizing world is emotionally taxing. However, when we move and organize collectively, we shall triumph. Before we proceed with the Q&A, let us first thank our partner organizations who helped make this event possible. This workshop is brought to you by INS with special thanks to Campus Alliance for Dedicated and Unified Action, UP Baguio, UPLB University Freshman Council, College of Engineering and Agro-Industrial Technology Student Council, Anakbayan Nueva Ecija, College of Human Ecology Student Council, College of Agriculture and Food Science Student Council, College of Human Ecology Freshman Council, Panday Sining Romblon, College Editors Guild of the Philippines, UPLB College of Development Communication Freshman Council, Likas Bayan, and College of Agriculture and Food Science Freshman Council. We'd also like to take this time to once again invite our audience to participate in our raffle event for a chance to win 1,000 pesos, wherein the link to purchase raffle entries will be posted in the chat box. And now the much awaited open forum for this event. We are now opening the floor for questions from the audience. So please feel free to send in your questions or clarifications here in the Zoom chat box. To those who would like to unmute, feel free also to message us so we may include you in the queuing system. So as we wait for the questions to come in, I really liked your presentation. I also have a few questions before. Yeah, so as someone who has only recently become intrigued with the process of map making, I recently read about it in a book by Gideon Lascaux called The Philippines is Not a Small Country. Can you suggest any readings for beginners like me who are really interested and intrigued about the process of map making and decolonizing narratives with regards to map making?
Right. My first in the list is Decolonization is Not a Metaphor by Professor Eve Tuck and Dr. Yang. There was a time when I thought I'm gonna change the place names into indigenous names, and that's it. Job done. But they said, okay, while those acts may help, at the end of the day, the spaces and sovereignty of indigenous peoples need to be respected, and the land meaning Fenwa, Banwa, which includes the waters and the air and everything, space needs to be returned to the indigenous and native peoples. So that was really eye-opening for me. Another one for the researchers is decolonizing methodologies by Dr. Linda Tohiwai Smith. That also really helped me. It's the introduction in that book. Dr. Smith is a Maori researcher. Professor Linda Tohiwai Smith said, "Research is a dirty word. There's probably no other word that sounds so harmful to native and indigenous folks. Even for me as a Filipino, I always try to there are projects that I stopped for a while. I said yes to before, but I paused for a while, especially mapping native land because I had to think why am I doing this? What's gonna happen if I make this? Am I the right map maker? Does this map need to be made right now? Because for us, especially since most of you are Filipinos too, we inherited and are still reproducing this problematic notion of mononational sovereignty. It doesn't mean that I have a passport of Republic of the Philippines. That doesn't mean I could easily just do what I want with geographical knowledge about our relatives, even if okay we descend from similar ancestors like the Austronesians. I just like to be more critical about that. And Dr. Linda Tuhiwai Smith really helped me unpack my positionality as a map maker and someone with relatively more privilege than the others. So those two. What else do I recommend? Also more by Professor Eve Tuck. They have written about avoiding damage-based narratives, and instead of always talking about hurt and trauma, which is important in truth telling and justice, we need to do that. We need to shift towards writing about desire. Ano bang gusto natin mangyari? Because they have noticed that while they did the research with their peoples, it just re-traumatized folks. And I noticed that with myself when I traveled to conferences. I just painted, I played into that game that, oh, I'm this Filipino, we're colonized, we have 20 cyclones a year. Please help us, give us something like that. And it just plays into the white saviorism too, which is very problematic. I noticed that too with other colleagues, so I try to talk with other folks about it. That wait a minute, that it's more complicated than that, and that while important, those events that damage us does not totally define who we are, and that's also how I arrived into learning more about our heritage as Austronesians and more. I'm sure there's far beyond that too. Good.
Thank you so much, Bro. Surely I will check those out. And I also liked how you talked about unlearning these kinds of narratives. Now, moving on to the second question from Gerardo Baja. He asked if you were to map make something that contradicts the current maps that have been tainted with imperialist and colonialist propaganda, how would you prove to others what the truth is if everyone is used to the maps that they have grown knowing? And he also adds that this is in the context wherein you have done your absolute best to ensure that your work is accurate and you made the map with the people.
I rest. That's what I do. I also had to accept the limits of my work. Hindi naman ako sa Hesus Kristo na minsan yung nanay ko din nakakatawa. Hindi, nasa gobyerno siya, hindi kami nag-agree sa mga ideolohiya. Pero naalala ko din yung sinasabi niya, anak, hindi ka sa Hesus Kristo, parte ka ng isang komunidad, isang kilusan sa aking mundo. And may mga bagay na may hangganan yung kaya kong gawin. So for example, within my industry, fundamentally it's still colonial. I still see this happening. Most of the time, I evaluate myself. Am I really decolonizing or anti-colonial? Because what I say, I'm just kind of suspending or mitigating or unsettling. And Maybe I just accept that for not because of the limitations of my body, and I'm sure both my ancestors and descendants would like me to also enjoy life somehow. There was a time before when I went outside of the Philippines and I was very passionate about yung nangyayari sa Pilipinas. Araw-araw maharabas kami. Until I had a breakdown, until I forgot to take care of myself. I forgot to take care of my friends and my loved ones. I had to stop. I had to stop that. Um, my hope is the contradictory spaces that I hold today, someday my descendants can expand that space. I always go back to my grandmother, yung nanay ng nanay ko. So yung nanay ko, scientist siya, fisheries scientist, at relihiyosong tao din. So Jesus and Darwin. Okay, prayer tayo mga anak. Tapos pagkatapos ng prayer, children, this world is a survival of the fittest. So kami mga bata, parang, okay, okay ka ma. Uh, Her mother, si Inang, sa Bulacan, was both Catholic and Espiritista. So, devout Catholic, Mama Mary, pero nagdadasal din, nagdadahon din. And looking back, I said, ito yung siguro yung path na binigay sa akin ng banwa, ng sanlibutan, na yung landas ng, lalo na nung matriarchal line ng nanay ko, is a contradictory one. It has a purpose. I believe, over the past 500 years, nag-shape-shift kami until a generation can do this. And I'm gonna shape-shift again, and my descendants will do that. And that's the hope. And with that in mind, hindi ako nawawalan ng pag-asa kasi yung paniniwala ko, habang buhay ang karagatan, magtatagumpay ang revolusyon.
Thank you so much, David, for that wonderful answer. Now, moving on to the next question from Emmanuel James Padagas. They gave three questions here. Firstly is, do we have open source maps on earthquake-induced land subsidence and climate-induced sea level rise in the Philippines?
So yung una, not as far as I know yet. I saw folks trying to, lalo na si Project Noah, that they were trying to do that. Yung earthquake induced subsidence, it's hard to, in my limited experience, it's harder to model compared to the usual landslide maps like yung slope induced na landslide maps. About sea level rise, it's similar. I noticed they've been doing the same. I hope there's something already. There are ones that are provided by international scientific groups. The drawback is these are very generalized, the hazard maps, and there are so many variables that are not factored in because we need more. Oh God, we need more resolution to do that, which is also problematic. Also, another issue that maybe tangential but very important is I noticed that we can have the best geospatial data in the world, but if the governance structure is very oppressive, that data will still be used to dispossess people instead of increasing their safety and reducing risk. My example is Tacloban. There, when I was in the planning sessions, and this is when I started questioning my practice and be more critical, I noticed that when the relocation plans were being drawn, the officers deciding on it and the officials used the hazard maps, the storm surge maps, like in the 40-meter no-build zone that I said. So people surge, the movement there was saying, don't do that because we're close to the sea, this is our livelihood, respect our rights. Then I saw the plans. Yung mga low-income communities, kung taga-squatter ka or tinitingnan na mahirap, papaalisin ka. Pero pag bahay ni Mayor, pag bahay ng mayaman, hindi aalis in the same hazard zone. So that's the part that we need to be critical about. Higher resolution does not necessarily translate to reduction of risk or resilience. All right.
Thank you po. So for the next question, is there any initiatives in creating maps on U.S. overseas military bases in the Philippines and overall in the Asia-Pacific region?
Not that I know of. We would like to do that soon in a safe way. Hopefully, the collective that I belong to can do that, or other collectives I'm part of. We could also apply. We could also approach it this way. How would citizens and inhabitants and natives and indigenous folks of the places where the bases and military facilities are located would like to reveal these to what effect so that we could account for the potential harm to. Yung sinabi ko kanina na gumawa kami ng mapa to reveal issues, but it could factor into problematic biases, or the same information can be used for harmful purposes. On the other hand, uh, people are already doing that. Sorry. Uh, there are publications already about that which are very interesting. Merong isa, si Alexander Arroyo, Race, War, and the Pacific, something like that. Um, very anti-colonial lens and critical geography. Uh, it lacks feminist views too, so that's a drawback. So have a look into that. And for more uh, astounding work about anti-colonialism and inspiration for indigenous sovereignty, please read the work by Professor Haunani K. Trask. She died a few weeks ago, which is very unfortunate, but please read about their life. And they have a book, I think the title is Notes from a Native Daughter, and it's a classic.
Thank you po for the next question. The Philippines is part of the Pacific Group. How can we enlighten our overseas Filipinos like Philams or Philippines who gladly claim that Filipinos are Pacific Islanders, not Southeast Asians, or Filipinos are Cesians, not Pacific Islanders? How can we stop this kind of narrative, and what maps can we show or provide?
Right. Very hot topic. I was called out too once and said, "Hey, David, hindi ka naman PI, parang pinaposition mo yung sarili mo na na PI," which is I'm thankful for the feedback too. And my explanation was my desire is to relate and to find the commonalities. And also, I need to be reminded and remind myself of there are also differences because, like I said, we are complex beings, multiple genealogies, multiple futures, but with common desire to be free and to have sovereignty over the places we belong. Not even over sovereignty with the places we belong. I cannot give prescriptions for that. I don't want to be another imposer. Uh, I could provide observations. So, for example, there are folks in the homeland, sa Philippines, who really identify as Asians. I respect that. There are folks in the US who want to belong to the Philippines. So they're trying to recreate certain parts of geographical knowledge, culture about the Philippines, and some of it is problematic too. And also within the Philippines, how let's say elites from Manila are using indigenous textiles, for example, without permission. On the other hand, we also need to recognize the desire for the diaspora Filipinos to belong. For me, I'm very happy that they would still like to identify as Filipino. That for me is very important, not just for the struggle, but as as a Filipino. Now I realized that while being here in a kind of short diaspora for the past 2 years or four, that when you leave the Philippines, you will really look for home. It never goes away. There was one time I was crying every night because I really miss the country. I cannot go home. There's COVID. It's not safe right now. It wasn't even safe before. Tinitiktikan din kami noon, kaya umalis muna ako for my safety nung nagmamapa kami ng war on drugs. So I couldn't go home. I miss my family. So what I did was to I tried to analyze why did I try to do that because it gives me meaning in life, and we need to understand our Philippines folks who are trying to do that. And I recognize the effort of the organizers who are doing national democratic organizing sa diaspora. So even though okay, medyo kaiba din yung pagpoposisyon, etc. For me in particular, I want to help recreate these connections because think about it, cultures evolve over time, and it's a product of multiple conditions. We just need to be more mindful of our choices about the identities that we choose. So for me, I identify as an Austronesian, but also not assume that my kind of Austronesianness is the only valid there is, in the hope that we could make spaces for each other. And I think that's what empire cannot defeat, because empire relies on homogeneous and very binary categories. You can only be Asian or Pacific. And for me, that's just absurd. It doesn't even align with linguistic realities, social realities, cultural reality. So I suppose this will be an ongoing conversation. I said on Twitter, life on Twitter as a Filipino and Philippines is to debate what does it mean to be a Filipino until we die. That's just a fun way of me saying, but let's continue that discussion.
Thank you po again. And for the second to the last question by uh, Carlo Luis Felipe, they asked, can cartographic knowledge and tools developed by colonizers be used against them in counter-mapping initiatives, or should we rediscover lost cartographic knowledge developed by our ancestors and use them as the sole basis for our future mapping initiatives?
Okay, I have a similar lesson that was given to me. There was a time here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, when people were recreating the waka, the double hull canoes, the ocean. Yung nakita nyo sa Moana na ninakaw din nila ng Disney sa mga indigenous people. Anyway, people were trying to recreate that. Just really wanted to. It's part of the sovereignty movements too. And there was there's still a debate about this, that how do folks recreate uh, the ocean voyaging canoes, because there are folks want gamitin nat, let's use traditional materials and not really extract resources from the environment. Let's do it as close as to how the ancestors did it before, let's say at least 500 years ago. And they have a point, especially sustainability, etc. On the other hand, there was an episode by, what's their name, Matwa Hek Busby, one of the first canoe builders. Matwa Hek Busby was a bridge builder, and then age 50 he retired. He built canoes. He was taught by Maupiailug from Micronesia, was who taught the Hawaiians too. There was a time when Matwa Hek was asked by folks, why are you using a chainsaw? Bakit kayo, hindi ba dapat nagpupukpok ka, ginagamit mo yung traditional materials, kasi ano nga to, returning to who we are. And then Mato Hex Busby said something very inspiring. He said, if my ancestors are alive today, they will also use a chainsaw because they are innovators too. So there's this problematic view that when we say we are re-indigenizing or going back to where we come from, that we need to do, it's like we don't need to freeze the image of who we are. That's my point. And my personal and evolving opinion is, in an anti-colonial struggle, all options are on the table. I will repeat that. In an anti-colonial struggle, all options are on the table. And I think this is a wisdom from the ancestors, kaya pa tayo buhay ngayon.
Thank you po for that wonderful answer. Now for the last question, from sent through the main chat from INS. So it's from an INS member. They said that they find your philosophy on networks and oceans and people so interesting. Isn't map making an activity based mostly on Euclidean geometry that is based on fixed points and lines? But your discovery is coming to show that things aren't necessarily fixed points in space and keep appearing or disappearing in different spaces. Have you had any speculations on using non-Euclidean geometry based map making in order to show how far more interconnected we all are?
Yeah, thank you. Parang ano, may MS jog yung nagsasabi nito. Thank you. Right. Yes, Euclidean Cartesian geometries are very dominant in map making. When I say map making, people immediately think of the flat map with the lines from north to south. Yes, it's because cartography, which I am now trying to presume is only one of the many ways of map making. This is part of my thesis. Map making is a bigger, I'm trying to reclaim what map making means. Map making is a bigger idea, practice, and then cartography with Euclidean geometries, etc., is part of that. We need to recognize that as a we backward and forwards and sideways. Um, my favorite example is the one that was said by Jim Inot, and their relations live near the Grand Canyon. Their genealogies there. Sabi ni Jim Inot, there are many systems of knowledge and many ways of knowing. What it means is there are maps in many things: maps in ceramics, maps in songs, maps in the dreams, maps in your body. Our way finding ancestors, and I learned this. I'm so thankful for the space given to me by our Maori cousins. Nung nandun ako sa dagat, naramdaman ko talaga na yung mapa nasa katawan ko. Nagkokontrahan nga yung mata ko, pati yung katawan. Kasi yung katawan ko, nararamdaman talaga niya yung dayog ng dagat. Yung mata ko, naging land-based na siya. And that's when I realized, I need to redefine what map making means. Halimbawa, kapag ako ay nagluluto, when I'm cooking mussels, nagluluto ko ng tahong, dito, linisin ko. Tapos aamin ko, na-transport talaga, I'm teleported back to the Philippines. Yung alam yung amoy ng tabing dagat, pag inamoy mo yung tahong, parehong-pareho. And for me, that is a map. And an anti-colonial, or hopefully at least decolonial way, is to reclaim what map making and map makers mean. Ang sabi ni Franz Fanon, we need to reclaim the power to define the world. And for me, I try to apply that sa ating map making.
Muli, maraming salamat po, David Garcia, for gracing our event. Sana nga na all of the participants here bring the saying, ang di lumingon sa pinanggalingan ay hindi makakarating sa kanilang pararoonan wherever they go. Kitang-kita na ang usapin ng heograpiya, kartografiya at imperialismo ay hindi dapat isolated. The status quo we have and experience today in all aspects and forms of living are mere products of yesterday. And as the younger generation, and the future generation rather, of digital map makers, we see the importance of keeping lived experiences political, much more if it is to reflect narratives and societies through representations like maps. Emphasizing also on making maps with the people, we recognize as well how important it is to create maps that do not overstep the boundaries of the people that live in these spaces. Again, thank you po ulit for being here. On behalf of INS, I hereby present this certificate of appreciation to David Garcia for imparting invaluable insights as our speaker in Terra Nullius Mapping Workshop given this 27th day of July 2021. Again, we would also like to tell everyone of the participants here to please to not leave the Zoom immediately so we can have a photo op later on with our speaker. But first, allow me also to thank our partner organizations, Sociosphere UPD, SAKBAYAN UPLB, Gabriela Youth PLM, and of course, our media partner, the UPLB Perspective. Before we end our event, I would also like to extend our deepest gratitudes to our audience for joining us today. We would love to hear your thoughts on today's program to answering the evaluation form seen through the QR code presented on the screen. This will also be our basis for issuing your certificates of attendance. And for the last time today, we invite our lovely audience members to participate in our raffle event for a chance to win 1,000 pesos. The link to purchase raffle entries will be posted in the chat box. And lastly, for the one last reminder that we will be streaming also our final event, the Solidarity Night with the Basic Math Situationer this July 31 on our Facebook account. And to those interested in joining the Institute as we continue to propagate and advance a nationalist consciousness, especially under these dire social conditions, you may sign up for an orientation at tinyurl.com/insorientation sign up form. So once again, thank you so much for your active participation and support. This has been Julian, your host for Terra Nullius Mapping Workshop. See you on the 31st and thank you po ulit.